All right, so today is a very special day. I'm super excited to be here with Michelle Jewell, who is the Global Head of Leadership Development. We're going to be talking about a very important topic today. And thank you so much for being here, Michelle.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. And so before we jump into the topic of really the importance of having empathy, and honestly, there's an ROI to empathy too. And so it's not just a nice to have or kind of a soft skill or something like that. It really impacts the workplace. We're going to go really deep into that. And also, as well as hopefully a couple tools to help us to be more empathetic, probably inside and outside of the workplace.
Yep.
But before we do that, I thought I would ask you, what either inspired you to greatness to where you really cared about learning and rising to the top of your field and really cared about people? Did something inspire you or someone, or was there something that you overcame, or how did you start down your path?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for me, it's probably a series of things, but I thought about a story that maybe looking back did influence kind of the path I've taken. And it's a silly story because we used to have a beach house in New Hampshire and it was an older house. And so critters would get into it. And I remember being home, just me, my sister, and my mom, and a little mouse ran across the mantle where the fireplace was. And of course, my sister and I scream and get on the couch. And my mom, who I know is also quite scared, figures out she's going to suck him up with the vacuum cleaner. Uh, Too afraid to get close, but that gave her, 6 feet of distance. And so when I was thinking back, I was like, why does that stick out? And it's this creative problem solving, right? You have to move something forward, you have to take care of a situation, but you can do it creatively. And from there forward, I was a biology student, I was a consultant. Everything has been about creative problem solving. And I really like to take that in and blend that with this idea of empathy, where it's not just solving the problem with the thing that's, going to move the work forward, but do it in a way where people feel seen and heard and brought on that journey.
Yeah, and it seems like if that's the case, then the outcome always seems to be the best possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So, you know, a lot of times being a woman in the workplace, it's not a clear path from A to B, in other words. So, have there been any, roadblocks or speed bumps along the way? And if so, how did you maneuver around them?
Yeah, my path has been a little bit all over the place. I started in consulting right out of college, mostly because it was that moment where you're like, now what do I do? And I loved it. I loved the consulting environment. I loved the travel. I loved how much I learned from being around very smart people, but it's a tough industry to work in, and I certainly burnt out. And so I had to make a decision on what to do next. And am very thankful to have found ThoughtWorks. Just by luck, I think. It was a LinkedIn posting, and make the move into an internal operations role. And from there, I've sort of taken a winding path with different roles, all kind of centering around this talent and people space, which has been awesome for me to really refine what are those things that bring me energy at work, and how do I make sure the role that I'm in makes the most of those things.
Mhm. Yeah, and so have there ever been any like side steps? Like, was it a straight shot, or, were there any challenges along the way?
It feels like uh, a little bit of a windy path, but no major challenges. Just I think some big decision points. Deciding what to do as I left consulting. I left at um, a pretty low place. I think it's definitely an industry that burns you out, and you don't know you're burning out until you hit that wall. And so making a tough decision about what to do that's going to take care of both, my mental health, but also be a good, challenging work environment. And from there, I think the other challenge has been opportunities to take roles that didn't really exist, which was, a little bit of a leap of faith. When I first stepped into learning and development, we didn't have a learning and development team. So it was a bit of a risk, and I took it, and I'm happy I did.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems like it's a common thread through a lot of the amazing women, such as yourself, that I've interviewed. And it's really about there being some uncertainty, maybe a little twinge of fear of, is this right? Am I ready? Do I check enough boxes? But then just taking the leap
Yeah,
through the
yeah.
uncertainty. So that's super cool. And, we're speaking the same language as far as the importance of empathy, but maybe through a couple different lenses. I think about empathy when we're teeing up how to have highly influential conversations. But I think you have a similar take on it, but maybe a little bit different. So, can you share why you feel that empathy is so important?
Yeah, I think it comes from a few places. I think being in consulting, you really learn that you have to have empathy for your client. You have to know what's important to them, what's driving them, what are the things that are influencing them so that you can help them be successful. So I'm happy that that was kind of how I got my career started, was an empathy first perspective. And then it came to this idea of influence and leadership, right? How do you get things done, especially in a place where you might not have authority? And how do you bring people along with you when maybe they don't agree yet? And how you can use empathy to actually get that done and tap into what I think has often been called a soft skill, which makes it feel a little less important to actually use it as a real power skill.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And let's just like backpedal for a second and talk about, because sometimes people get, at least in my, coaching experience, people get empathy and sympathy a
Hmm.
little bit confused. And so, can you share a little bit about the difference and also how we can be more empathetic?
Yeah, I think we would talk about this a lot in training, and empathy is that idea of really getting an understanding of somebody else's world, right? What are they feeling? What are they experiencing? But not taking it on yourself. Whereas sympathy is going to be much more of that taking on those emotions. When it's a very dear friend who's going through something hard, you might be taking on the weight of that. And so that's often how I think about the difference between sympathy, which can come with a lot of emotional weight, and empathy, which is really just about putting yourself in that other person's world.
And from a influence perspective, just connecting with them and showing other people that I see you, not as I see you, but I
Mhm.
care. And it seems
Yeah,
like that's a really important runway, especially when it comes to high performing teams.
yeah. Yeah, we talk a lot about radical candor as a really important tool to use, which is that idea of coming from a place of caring, but not being afraid to be really clear and direct when it comes to feedback. This is really powerful. And it does have that empathy built in there because it is a caring thing to do, but a lot of people shy away from that kind of direct feedback because it feels not nice.
Mhm. Yeah, but a lot of times, and maybe you might feel the same way, but the most radical candor that we received that maybe is not feeling so good in the moment, we can find a way to be grateful for it later.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there's been plenty of moments where the feedback that I was given in the moment felt really, really awful. And I am tough on myself. So when I get feedback that is very constructive, I probably make it feel even worse. But then once I've had a little bit of time to process and I recognize the relationship that I have with the person who gave that feedback, I can see the value of they shared this to make me better, to make sure, I can move forward.
Mhm. Yeah, that just seems so important. So if you're listening and wondering how this applies to you, then really think about especially not to throw us women under the bus all at the same time, but it is a pretty consistent trait of women being hard on themselves. And also, it's just not something that we cooked up in our mind. It's something, there's so many in general, even generational indoctrinations that have placed certain expectations. And so it's, really quite understandable. So to be a little bit easier on yourself. And so let's just flip that and think about if we're leading teams and we are not empathetic, meaning that and on a scale of 1 to 10 with our emotional IQ, in terms of empathy, if we are hovering around a 0 to a 2, which may not be the case for us, but maybe it's the case for a manager or a leader. So,
Hmm.
twofold question is, how do we maneuver around that if we are experiencing that in other, or if
Mm.
we're listening to this and we're thinking, uh-oh, I might be that 0 to 3 person. Just what's a way to improve?
Yeah, I'll start with the second half because I think it's a little easier. If you are listening and you say, "Uh-oh, that might be me," good news is you're already on the journey to getting better, right? That self-awareness piece is that first moment where you can say there is something to work on. And from there, it's easier, right? There's a lot of great resources and tips and tools for how you can build that empathy over time. The challenge comes up often when it's people who don't realize the value of it or they don't realize that they're not very good at it. And so I think if you are facing a leader who falls into that category, it's tough. I would say, a lot of it is your own self-management of really recognizing what are the things you can control and what are those things you can't control. And yet, unfortunately, we can't control uh, how our leaders are and their emotional intelligence. Depending on that relationship, maybe you can influence it a little bit. But if it's not a strong relationship, it might be out of your influence as well. And so I think in those cases, it's important to take care of yourself, to have mentors and people outside of your direct team to provide a little bit more of that emotional coaching and support where you need it.
Yeah, so the message that I'm hearing then is if you have a manager who is the 0 to 3, and it's possible to have a conversation and hopefully that will upskill for them, but maybe they don't recognize it. And I think there's an interesting statistic that was out there. I think it's like 80% of men that are told that they sound angry or condescending. They're like, no, I don't. And even if
Yeah.
you record their voice, then they still don't hear it. And so it could be totally unintentional, but I like to say what you're thinking in your head comes out your mouth. And so I think that's just a good, reflection to think about. But I love that you bring that up so much and that thinking about what we have control over, what we don't have, and how we can regulate our own emotions around it. Not to say that it's
Yeah.
easy. Um,
It's not easy, but it's so important.
yeah. And so what is a call to action? So if someone, for those who are listening, maybe they want to be a more empathetic manager, but not just empathetic, like hold the line, be confident, just be seen, be heard, but also be more empathetic to get the best out of their team. What would you advise?
I think it's finding that way to blend the empathy, which might come natural to you, with things like influence. So, how does being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes change the way that you give a team direction, get them on board with a change or a vision, convince them of something new that has to happen, even the way you deliver feedback to them? If you can take that moment to really come at it from an angle of empathy, I think you'll find that people are much more receptive to whatever it is that you're giving them.
Mhm. All right, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then if you're thinking in terms of tools that someone can start doing immediately, what is one thing that if they were just going to kind of stick it in their golden tool belt, that the next time they have a conversation, they can start thinking or doing things this way?
I'll give you a a really easy one, which is listening. So much of empathy comes down to the skill of listening. We all think we're good at it. Hey, I listen all the time. But when you really tune in to how well you're listening, what are all those things getting in the way, you'll realize there's a lot of opportunity for growth. And so we like to give people a really easy activity, which is the next time you ask someone, good morning, how are you doing? Really listen to what they say. So often people give a very quick, I'm good kind of answer because the other person's getting ready to ask what it is they came for, tell them the thing they came to tell them. And so practice just listening. Leave some silence, leave some space, and see what you learn about someone.
Yeah, that is great. I'm also wondering too, sometimes it's maybe even eye connection. Like when you say,
Hmm.
I think there's a big difference to say, oh, how are you doing as you're walking out the door? Or, how are
Yeah.
you doing as you're opening up your laptop or whatever, then, really pausing and looking in someone's eyes and saying, how
Hmm.
are you doing?
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
a lot different.
Yeah, being intentional about you're asking the question to really get that answer, not just to tick the box that you said a pleasantry.
Yeah, 100%. And then also, I have to ask the question, what are the consequences in the workplace if we are not empathetic? In my experience, it seems to really impact productivity and ultimately
Mhm.
profitability. But what are some of the consequences that you've seen?
I think it absolutely has a direct impact on the quality of the work your team is putting out, which depending on what you're doing can have a very direct impact on the bottom line, or maybe it has a ripple effect down there. Uh, but it's people losing engagement. It's people not being motivated to get the job. It's things slowing down. And at its worst, it's people who leave, right? I hear people who say, I just can't work for this person. I need to go work on a different team, right? So that turnover on your team, is costly.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I was just speaking with Angela Stopper, who's the over at UC Berkeley, that learning development, head of learning development over there. And she was really backing you up on that one and saying it is just so incredibly costly. So empathy, it's not a nice to have. It's not simply a soft skill, but it's
Yeah.
really so, so important to the ROI of our organization. So, Michelle, thank you so much for talking about this very, very important skill that is really going to help us to be more human, help us to be more productive, and ultimately help us to be more profitable too.
Of course. Thank you.